CEO gets stuck in an elevator with a claustrophobic pizza delivery girl, and the chaos makes them fall in love. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what is your biggest fear? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy! Adrian Sterling's world was a fortress of silence and control, built high above the noisy chaos of New York City. From the 80th floor of Sterling Tower, a skyscraper of smoked glass and cold steel, he commanded his global logistics empire with the emotional detachment of a chess grandmaster. His office was a minimalist sanctuary of white, black, and gray. No personal photos, no unnecessary decorations, and certainly no plants. Plants were unpredictable, messy variables. For Adrian, life was a series of solvable equations, and human emotion was the most irritating, inefficient variable of them all. This philosophy was why his personal life was as sparse as his office decor. After a bitter divorce years ago, where his ex-wife had famously told a reporter he had all the warmth of a server room, Adrian had decided that emotional attachments were a liability he could no longer afford. His life was his work. It was clean. It was logical. It was lonely, but he had long ago convinced himself that loneliness was just another word for peace. On this particular Tuesday night, however, his perfectly ordered world was about to be invaded by the one thing he despised most, a greasy, unpredictable, and entirely chaotic variable in a cardboard box. "What do you mean, the caterer's canceled?" he barked into his phone, staring at the panoramic view of the city lights without seeing any of their beauty. "I have the board of directors from the Tokyo merger arriving in 1 hour for a late-night signing session. They are expecting a full sushi spread." His assistant on the other end stammered an apology about a sudden kitchen emergency. "Unacceptable," Adrian snapped. "Solve it." "Sir, it's 10 p.m. Every high-end catering service is closed." Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a rare flicker of irritation. "Then get them something else. Something fast. I don't care what it is, just get food up here in the next 30 minutes. He hung up, already annoyed at the disruption. Efficiency was everything, and this was the opposite of efficient. Across town in the warm, noisy, and wonderfully chaotic kitchen of Mama Rosa's Pizzeria, Lena Petrova was in her element. She moved through the space with the grace of a dancer, spinning pizza dough, shouting orders, and laughing with her coworkers, all while a classic rock song blasted from a small flour-dusted radio. At 26, Lena was a force of nature. She was a whirlwind of energy, with a sharp wit, a laugh that was too loud, and a heart that was too big for her own good. She was working 2 jobs, this one and a weekend gig at a bookstore, to put her younger brother through his first year of college. Her life was a constant juggle of rent, bills, and tuition payments, but she faced it all with a stubborn, cheerful optimism that drove her landlord crazy and her friends to admiration. "Order up," she called, sliding a perfectly cooked pepperoni pizza into a box. "1 large with extra cheese," heading to a very important meeting with Destiny on someone's couch. Her phone buzzed. A new order, an urgent one. Sterling Tower, 80th floor, penthouse office, 3 extra large pizzas, 1 pepperoni, 1 veggie, 1 supreme. "Wow, someone on the 80th floor is having a serious crisis," she said to her coworker Rico. "This has all-night board meeting that's gone to hell in a handbasket written all over it." "Just be quick," Rico said. They paid extra for the rush delivery. The guy on the phone sounded like he'd choose nails for breakfast. "Don't worry," Lena said, grabbing the thermal bags. "I'm the fastest delivery girl in the 5 boroughs. I speak 2 languages, English, and I have your pizza." As she zipped through the slick, rain-swept streets on her electric scooter, she hummed along to the music in her headphones, completely unaware that she was about to deliver a pepperoni pizza straight into the heart of the most controlled, chaos-averse fortress in New York City. The lobby of Sterling Tower was so quiet and sterile that Lena felt like she should have wiped her feet on a disinfectant mat before entering. A stern-looking security guard looked her up and down as if her pizza bags might contain a biohazard. "Delivery for Adrian Sterling," she announced cheerfully. The guard spoke into his wrist. "The pizza is here, sir." He listened for a moment, then looked back at Lena. "He'll meet you at the executive elevator." A moment later, the man himself appeared. He was exactly as Rico had described, tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her scooter, and with an expression that suggested he had just been forced to listen to a very long, very boring story. "You have the pizzas?" he asked, his voice a low, impatient rumble. "Piping hot and ready for their corporate debut?" Lena replied, holding up the bags. He just grunted and turned towards a sleek, private elevator. "Follow me." He swiped a keycard, and the steel doors slid open silently. The interior was all polished chrome and dim, recessed lighting. It felt less like an elevator and more like a teleportation device from a sci-fi movie. Lena stepped inside, the smell of pepperoni and garlic a glorious, defiant invasion of the sterile space. "Is this the penthouse floor?" she quipped as the doors closed. "Or are we ascending to another dimension of gray?" Adrian just gave her a withering look and pressed the button for the 80th floor. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. They stood in an awkward silence, the only sound the faint whir of the machinery. He stared at the floor indicator. She stared at the back of his head, wondering if a man that rich was even capable of smiling. And then it happened. Somewhere between the 59th and 60th floors, there was a loud, jarring lurch. The elevator shuddered violently, throwing Lena against the wall. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging them into absolute pitch-black darkness. A single, dim, red emergency light flickered on, casting their faces in a hellish glow. Adrian's first reaction was pure, cold fury. He pulled out his phone, its screen providing a weak light, no signal. He slammed his hand against the emergency call button. Nothing, just a dead, mocking silence. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Absolutely unbelievable. The one night I have the Tokyo board waiting." He was so focused on his own frustration, on the logistical nightmare this had become, that he didn't notice the change in Lena. Her cheerful, sarcastic demeanor had vanished. In the dim red light, her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror that was raw and primal. Her breathing, which had been normal moments before, was now coming in short, ragged gasps. She had pressed herself into the corner of the elevator, her hands flat against the cold steel walls as if trying to push them away. "Hey," Adrian said, his annoyance finally giving way to a flicker of concern as he noticed her state. "Are you okay?" I can't," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "I can't breathe." "Of course you can breathe," he said, his tone logical, almost dismissive. "The ventilation is on a separate system. It's perfectly fine." "No," she whispered, her eyes darting around the small dark space. "The walls, they're closing in." He finally understood. Claustrophobia. Of all the inefficient, illogical human frailties, he was now trapped in a metal box with a woman having a full-blown panic attack. This night was officially going to hell in a handbasket. "All right, look," he said, trying to take control of the situation as he always did. "You need to regulate your breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, exhale for 8. It's a simple physiological response. You can control it." His words, meant to be helpful, were like gasoline on a fire. "Control it?" she gasped, her voice rising in panic. "You think this is something I can just control? It's not a spreadsheet, you suit. I can't just put it in a different column." She slid down the wall, curling into a ball in the corner, her hands now clutching her head. "I can't do this. I can't be in here. I need to get out. I need to get out now." Adrian stared at her, completely out of his depth. He could negotiate a hostile takeover, he could analyze complex market data, he could fire a senior executive without blinking. But he had absolutely no idea how to handle this raw, messy, uncontrollable wave of human terror. His fortress had been breached, and the chaos he had spent his entire life avoiding was now curled up on the floor of his private elevator, and it was looking at him with eyes full of a fear so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the tiny space. Adrian's mind, a place usually filled with the clean, orderly hum of data and strategy, was now a cacophony of alarms. His entire operating system was crashing. The problem in front of him, a crying, hyperventilating woman in a small dark box, had no logical solution. He couldn't command it into submission. He couldn't buy it off. He couldn't delegate it to an underling. For the first time in his adult life, he was utterly, completely useless. His first instinct was to retreat, to put up his walls of cold logic. This is an irrational response, miss. He paused. He didn't even know her name. The statistical probability of the elevator cables snapping is less than 0.001%. We are perfectly safe. His words, meant to be a beacon of calming fact, were met with a strangled sob from the corner. Safe? Lena gasped, looking up at him, her face streaked with tears in the eerie red light. I feel like I'm in a coffin, and you're reading me the warranty. The sheer, absurd accuracy of her statement broke through his panic-induced formality. A coffin's warranty. It was ridiculous, and for a split second, an alien impulse went through him. The urge to laugh. He suppressed it immediately. This was not a laughing matter. He needed a new strategy. His logical approach had failed. He needed to try something else. But what did one do with a panicking human? He had more experience dealing with hostile foreign governments. He thought of the one other person in his life who had panic attacks. Chloe. After the divorce, she would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, terrified of the dark, convinced the walls of her room were shrinking. What did the nannies do? They read her stories. They sang songs. They distracted her. Distraction. It was a variable, at least. Okay, he said, his voice softer now, less like a CEO and more like someone trying to coax a frightened animal out from under a porch. Okay, you're right. Forget the statistics. New plan. He knelt down, not too close, but enough to be on her level, a gesture that was completely foreign to his usual towering posture. Tell me about the pizza. She looked at him, as if he had just started speaking in tongues. The pizza? Yes, he said, seizing the thread of the idea. The pizzas. You have 3 of them. I'm assuming they're for the Tokyo board. Tell me about them. What are the ingredients? Is the pepperoni spicy? Is the crust thick or thin? I need details. It's a culinary due diligence. Lena stared at him, her panicked breathing hitching in confusion. You want a pizza analysis now? Absolutely, he said, his voice gaining a manufactured urgency. This is a critical business dinner. The fate of a billion-dollar merger could rest on the quality of this crust. I need your professional opinion. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever said, but it was so unexpected, so completely bizarre, that it momentarily short-circuited her panic. Her mind, which had been spiraling in a loop of terror, was forced to latch on to a new, concrete problem. The crust, she said, her voice still shaky, it's a classic New York style. Thin, but not cracker thin. Crispy on the outside, chewy on the inside. Mama Rosa says the secret is using a little bit of honey in the dough. Honey, he repeated as if it were a vital piece of intelligence. Fascinating. And the sauce? It's made from San Marzano tomatoes, she said, her breathing starting to even out as her brain shifted from panic to pizza. She simmers it for 6 hours with fresh basil and a whole clove of garlic. It's not too sweet, it's balanced. Balanced, he echoed, nodding seriously. Balance is key. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that her eyes were no longer darting around the elevator. They were focused on a middle distance, a place people go when they are accessing a memory. The distraction was working. He needed to keep it going. What's your favorite pizza? He asked. The question seemed to bring her back a little more. Mine? I like the simple ones. A classic margarita. Fresh mozzarella, good tomatoes, a single basil leaf. It's perfect. It doesn't need 1,000 toppings to be good. So, you're a purist, he said, a flicker of a real smile touching his lips. I guess you could say that, she said, her voice almost back to normal. I think the best things in life are usually the simple things that are done really, really well. Her words echoed in the small space, and for a moment they weren't talking about pizza anymore. He thought of his own life, a life cluttered with 1,000 complicated, expensive, and ultimately empty toppings. The moment of connection was broken by a loud creak from above them, followed by a slight shudder of the elevator car. Lena's breath caught in her throat, and the panic instantly flooded back into her eyes. It's moving, she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. We're going to fall. No, we're not, he said, his voice firm but calm this time. It's just the brakes settling. It's normal. He knew he had to act fast before she spiraled again. The pizza distraction had run its course. He needed something stronger. He sat down on the floor opposite her, leaning his back against the cold steel wall, mirroring her position. The gesture was a silent offer of solidarity. My turn, he said. Your turn for what? "To tell you something that scares me," he said, the words feeling foreign and risky. She looked at him, her fear momentarily eclipsed by her surprise. He took a deep breath. "I'm afraid of silence," he confessed. "Not this kind of quiet, but the silence in my house. After my divorce, the house became too quiet. I started working all the time, filling every minute with calls, with meetings, with noise, just so I wouldn't have to hear it." He looked down at his hands. "I think I'm afraid that if I ever stop moving, if I'm ever truly quiet, I'll realize how completely and utterly alone I am." The confession hung in the air between them, a raw, unguarded piece of his soul that he had never shown to another living person. He had expected her to say something, to offer a platitude, to look away in discomfort. Instead, she just listened. And when he was done, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered understanding. "My first night in New York was the quietest night of my life," she said softly. "I had just arrived, I knew no one. I was staying in a tiny room with a window that faced a brick wall. I could hear my own heart beating, and I thought, this is it. This is the sound of being alone." It was terrifying. "What did you do?" he asked, his own story feeling less like a unique tragedy and more like a shared human experience. "I started singing," she said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Off-key, terrible songs from the radio, just to fill the space, just to remind myself I was still there." She looked at him, and her eyes were full of a deep, profound empathy. "You fill your life with work? I filled my room with bad singing. We all have our ways of fighting the silence, I guess." He stared at her. This chaotic, pizza-delivering, claustrophobic woman. She understood. She didn't pity him. She didn't judge him. She simply saw him, his fear, his loneliness, and she met it with her own. In the dim, red light of the broken elevator, surrounded by the smell of cooling pizza, a strange and fragile connection began to form. They were no longer the billionaire CEO and the delivery girl. They were just Adrian and Lena, two lonely people afraid of the quiet, sharing their stories in the dark. He found himself telling her more. About his marriage, about Chloe, about the guilt he carried for being a father who didn't know how to play. "I buy her things," he admitted, the confession feeling shameful, "because I don't know how to give her me." "Kids don't want things, Adrian," Lena said gently. "They want time. They want you to sit on the floor and build a lopsided Lego tower with them. They want you to read them the same story for the 100th time with all the funny voices. They just want you." "I don't know how to do the funny voices," he said, and the admission was so painfully honest it was almost comical. A real, genuine laugh escaped Lena. "Then it's a good thing you've met me," she said, her old, cheerful spark returning. "I am a master of funny voices. I can do a grumpy troll, a squeaky mouse, and a very convincing impression of a talking pizza." He found himself smiling, a real, unforced smile. The panic in his chest had been replaced by something else, something warm and light. They talked for what felt like hours. He learned about her dream of opening a small bookstore cafe one day. She learned about his secret love for old black and white films. They discovered they both hated cilantro and believed that pineapple on pizza was a crime against humanity. They were just two people, sharing the small, ordinary details that make up a life. It was in the middle of a story she was telling about her younger brother's disastrous attempt to build a rocket in their backyard that the elevator gave another, much more violent lurch. This time, a shower of sparks rained down from a ceiling panel, and the car dropped a few feet with a sickening groan before catching again. Lena screamed, the terror instantly returning, and this time, without thinking, she launched herself across the small space and grabbed onto him, her face buried in his chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. Instinct took over. Adrian wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "It's okay," he whispered into her hair, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I've got you. It's okay. We're not falling. I've got you." He held her like that, her small, trembling body pressed against his, the smell of rain and pizza and something uniquely her filling his senses. He could feel the frantic beating of her heart against his own, and in that moment he realized that he wasn't just comforting her, she was grounding him. Her very real, very human fear was an anchor in the middle of his own controlled, sterile world. "Just breathe with me," he said softly, his own breathing deep and even, in and out, just like that. "You're not alone in here." She clung to him, her breathing slowly beginning to match his. The immediate danger had passed, but neither of them let go. The professional boundaries, the social chasm between their two worlds, it all melted away in the shared simple act of one human being comforting another. He could feel the soft texture of her hair against his cheek, the warmth of her body through his expensive suit. And it didn't feel like a liability. It felt right. He didn't know how long they stayed like that, huddled together on the floor of the dark elevator. But he knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that when the doors finally opened, his perfectly ordered, carefully controlled world would never be the same. The sound that finally broke their fragile truce was the metallic clang of a maintenance worker's wrench from above, followed by a muffled voice shouting, "All right, give it a try now." Suddenly, the main lights of the elevator flickered on, blindingly bright after hours in the dim red glow. The car gave a gentle hum, and with a smooth, almost apologetic glide, it began to ascend. The crisis was over. The bubble had burst. Lena and Adrian sprang apart as if they had received an electric shock. The intimacy of the dark, confined space evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was once again the billionaire CEO in a rumpled, expensive suit. She was the pizza delivery girl with tear-streaked mascara and messy hair. The vast, unbridgeable chasm between their worlds was suddenly, painfully, visible again. Lena scrambled to her feet, brushing non-existent dust off her jeans, her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite name. She retreated to her corner, clutching the now cold pizza bags like a shield. Adrian stood up as well, straightening his tie with a practiced, mechanical motion, his face reverting to its familiar, unreadable mask of corporate control. The silence that filled the final few floors of their ascent was 1,000 times more awkward than the one they had started with. Before, they were strangers. Now, they were strangers who had shared their deepest fears, who had clung to each other in the dark. It was a knowledge that hung between them, heavy and unspoken. When the elevator doors finally slid open on the 80th floor, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Adrian's assistant, a perpetually anxious young man named Thomas, was there, flanked by 2 uniformed security guards and a very flustered-looking building engineer. "Mr. Sterling, thank God," Thomas exclaimed, his voice high with relief. "We've been trying to reach you for hours. The backup generators failed. The entire system had to be manually reset." Adrian stepped out of the elevator, his CEO persona fully engaged. "Get the Tokyo board into the main conference room," he commanded, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Apologize for the delay, offer them the finest single malt from my private collection, and tell them I will be with them in 10 minutes. "Yes, sir," Thomas said, already scurrying away to do his bidding. Then, Adrian turned to Lena. She was standing just inside the elevator, looking small and out of place amidst the corporate splendor of the executive floor. He looked at her, and for a split second the mask slipped. She saw a flicker of the man from the elevator, the one who was afraid of the quiet. He cleared his throat, the mask snapping back into place. "Thank you for the pizza analysis," he said, his tone formal, almost dismissive. "Please give this to my assistant." He pulled a thick money clip from his pocket and peeled off several $100 bills for the pizzas and for your trouble. The gesture, meant to be a simple, efficient transaction, was a brutal dismissal of everything that had happened between them. He was trying to put her back in her box. The delivery girl, a problem that could be solved with money. Lena looked at the money in his outstretched hand, then up at his face. The hurt in her eyes was sharp and clear. She didn't take the bills. "The pizza is on the house," she said, her voice quiet but laced with an unmistakable steely pride. "Consider it a consultation fee." Without another word, she turned and walked back into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. The steel doors slid shut, leaving Adrian standing there alone in the hallway, holding a handful of useless money, feeling a profound and unsettling sense of loss. He had gotten his control back. He had restored his orderly world. But as he watched the floor indicator show her descent, he had the distinct feeling that he had just made a terrible, irreversible mistake. For the next 2 days, Lena tried to scrub the memory of that night from her mind. She threw herself into her work, taking extra shifts at the pizzeria, picking up every delivery that came her way. She needed the noise, the motion, the exhaustion. Anything to keep from thinking about the cold, sterile silence of Sterling Tower and the man who lived within it. But the memory was stubborn. It would ambush her at the oddest moments. She'd be kneading dough and remember the feel of his expensive suit under her cheek. She'd be riding her scooter through the rain and remember the sound of his voice, low and vulnerable, admitting his fear of being alone. She hated him for making her feel pity. She hated him for making her feel a connection. And most of all, she hated herself for the small, traitorous part of her that missed him. On Thursday night, she was delivering a pizza to a luxury apartment building a few blocks from Sterling Tower. As she was leaving, she saw a familiar black car pull up. Adrian Sterling stepped out. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing casual slacks and a dark sweater. He looked tired, older than she remembered. Their eyes met across the rain-slicked street. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The noisy New York traffic faded into a dull roar. It was just the two of them, caught in a silent, charged standoff. He started to walk towards her. Her first instinct was to jump on her scooter and speed away, but she was tired of running. She stood her ground, her chin held high, the empty pizza bag clutched in her hand like a shield. He stopped a few feet away from her. "I was wrong," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the noise of the city. "You're going to have to be more specific," she replied, her tone cool. "In the hallway," he said. "The money." It was a stupid, reflexive thing to do. I was trying to put things back in their neat little boxes because I was scared. "Scared of what?" she challenged. "The claustrophobic pizza girl?" "No," he said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Scared of what I felt in that elevator. Scared of how you made me feel." The raw honesty of his confession disarmed her. "And how did I make you feel?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Like a human being," he admitted. "And I haven't felt like that in a very long time." It was disorienting. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Welcome to the club. My entire life is disorienting." They stood in a strange, fragile truce on the wet pavement. "I need to ask you something," he said. "If you're going to offer me a job, the answer is no." He almost smiled. "It's not a job offer. It's a request for a consultation." "I'm a pizza delivery girl, Mr. Sterling. My consultation services are limited to the pros and cons of extra anchovies." "This is a different kind of problem," he said. "It's about my daughter." The mention of Chloe instantly lowered her defenses. "Is she okay?" "Physically, she's fine," he said, a shadow of pain crossing his face. "But she's like I was, lost in the quiet. The nannies, the tutors, they can't reach her. But you, in that elevator, you knew how to fight the silence." He looked at her, his usual arrogance completely gone, replaced by a desperate, paternal plea. "I don't know how to do it, Lena. I don't know how to reach my own daughter, but I think you do. I'm not asking you to be her nanny, I'm just asking. Could you show me how?" It was a complete and utter surrender. The master of control was admitting he had none. The man who saw emotion as a liability was begging for a lesson in it. Lena looked at him, at this powerful, broken man, and she saw the lonely little boy he had described, the one who had hidden in his grandfather's basement listening to jazz. Her heart, which she had tried so hard to shield, ached for him. "1 hour," she said finally, "Saturday afternoon, at the park across from your tower. But you have to bring Chloe, and you," she added, her voice firm, "are not allowed to check your phone, not even once." "Deal," he said, a look of profound relief on his face. "And Adrian," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Yes? This one is on the house, too." Saturday arrived with a crisp, clear autumn sky. Lena was sitting on a park bench when she saw them approach. Adrian was in a casual sweater, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Chloe was walking beside him, a tiny, silent figure, her hand lost in his. "Hi, Chloe," Lena said gently as they reached the bench. Chloe just looked at her eyes big and solemn, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," Lena said, turning to Adrian. "First lesson. Stop looking at her like she's a problem to be solved. She's a kid. Kneel down, get on her level." He looked awkward, but he did as she said, crouching down in front of his daughter. "Now what?" he asked. "Now you stop talking about what you think she needs and you ask her what she wants to do," Lena instructed. Adrian looked at his daughter. "Chloe," he said, his voice a little strained. What What would you like to do? Chloe was silent for a long moment, just looking at her father. Then, she pointed a small finger towards the playground. The swings, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The swings, Adrian repeated, as if it were a foreign concept. Okay, let's go to the swings. What followed was a slow, painful, and ultimately beautiful lesson in the art of play. At first, Adrian was a disaster. He pushed the swing with a stiff, mechanical motion. He tried to make conversation by asking Chloe about her school curriculum. No, Lena said, shaking her head from the bench. You're not conducting a performance review. You're playing. Be silly. Make a funny noise. Tell her a stupid story. I don't know any stupid stories, he said, looking completely lost. Then make one up. He looked at his daughter, who was swinging gently, her expression still distant. He took a deep breath. Once upon a time, he began, his voice stiff, there was a financial portfolio that wanted to become a rocket ship. It was a terrible start. But then he looked at Lena, and she gave him an encouraging nod. He kept going. He told a ridiculous story about the rocket ship portfolio's journey to the moon, where it met a grumpy alien who was actually just sad because he had lost his favorite asteroid. It was a nonsensical, illogical story. And halfway through, a small, miraculous sound reached his ears. A giggle. Chloe was giggling. He looked at her, and she was smiling, a real, genuine smile. That's a silly story, Daddy, she said. Yes, he said, his heart swelling. It is. For the next hour they played. He learned to be silly. He learned to listen. He learned to simply be present. He and Chloe built a sandcastle. They went down the slide. They had a very serious conversation with a squirrel. And through it all, Lena watched from a distance, a quiet, guiding presence. As the sun began to set, they sat together on the bench. A tired but happy Chloe nestled between them, her head resting on her father's lap. How did you know? Adrian asked Lena, his voice full of a quiet awe. Know what? How to reach her. I didn't, she said honestly. I just listened. Kids are always telling us what they need. We just have to be quiet enough to hear it. He looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, a faint smile on her lips. Then he looked at Lena, at her kind, intelligent eyes. I think, he said softly, that I've been a very bad listener for a very long time. It's never too late to learn, she replied. In the golden light of the setting sun, he realized that she hadn't just taught him how to be a father. She was teaching him how to be a human. And he knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that he never wanted the lessons to end. The lesson in the park was not a magic bullet, but it was a beginning. The fortress around Adrian's heart now had a small, recently made gate, and he was tentatively learning how to open it. He started to see his daughter not as a fragile responsibility to be managed, but as a small, wonderful person to be known. He began trying, in his own clumsy, endearingly awkward way, to put Lena's advice into practice. He would come home from work an hour earlier, a feat his executive board found both baffling and alarming. He would sit on the floor of Chloe's room, surrounded by a sea of toys, and attempt to play. His first few attempts were a disaster. He tried to organize the doll's tea party according to a project management flowchart. He attempted to build a Lego castle based on an actual architectural blueprint he'd printed out. Chloe would watch him with a mixture of patience and mild concern, as if he were a very large, very confused puppy. Daddy, she said one evening, after he had tried to create a strategic risk assessment for her teddy bear's planned expedition to the kitchen. You're thinking too hard? Barnaby doesn't need a risk assessment. He needs a tiny, imaginary jetpack. Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this, Chloe. It's okay, she said, patting his hand with a wisdom far beyond her years. Maybe you should ask Lena for more lessons. The thought had crossed his mind more times than he cared to admit. He found himself inventing reasons to call Lena, asking for her professional consultation on matters that were becoming increasingly personal. She won't eat her broccoli, he said into the phone one night, his voice a desperate whisper from the hallway outside the dining room. I've presented her with the nutritional data. I've explained the long-term benefits of a fiber-rich diet. She remains unconvinced. He could hear Lena trying to stifle a laugh on the other end of the line. Adrian, you can't negotiate with a 7-year-old about broccoli. You have to make it fun. Tell her they're tiny trees from the land of the giants, and that eating them gives her superpower strength. And for God's sake, put some cheese on them. He followed her instructions. To his utter astonishment, Chloe not only ate the broccoli, but she asked for more superpower trees. He was beginning to realize that Lena's brand of chaotic, story-driven logic was far more effective in the real world than his own cold, hard data. He started inviting her over, under the guise of needing her help with Chloe. First, it was for an afternoon. Then, it was for dinner. Soon, she was a regular presence in their lives, a warm, vibrant sunbeam in the cold, quiet mansion. She taught him how to make pancakes that weren't perfectly round but were delicious. She taught him that the best way to have a conversation with Chloe was while doing something else, drawing, baking, or giving Barnaby the bear a very serious bath. She taught him how to listen, not just to Chloe's words, but to the feelings behind them. With Lena there, the house started to change. The oppressive silence was replaced by the sound of laughter, of music, of a little girl chattering excitedly about her day. Adrian found himself leaving work on time, not out of duty, but out of a genuine desire to be home. He would find them in the living room, building a city out of cardboard boxes, or in the kitchen, covered in flour, and he would feel a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He was falling for her. It was an undeniable, terrifying, and exhilarating truth. He was falling for her quick wit, her boundless compassion, and the way she saw the world not as a series of problems to be solved, but as a collection of stories to be cherished. But he was also acutely aware of the chasm between their worlds. She would talk about her struggles, the rising cost of her brother's tuition, the leaky faucet in her apartment that her landlord refused to fix, and his first instinct was to write a check, to solve the problem with the only tool he knew how to use. But he knew that wasn't what she wanted. She wasn't looking for a savior, she was looking for a partner, and he had no idea how to be one. The conflict came to a head over something as simple as a leaky faucet. "He's a slumlord, that's what he is," Lena said one evening, frustration clear in her voice as they cleaned up after dinner. "I've called him 3 times this week. The leak in my bathroom is getting worse. At this point, I'm thinking of building a small ark." Adrian's CEO brain immediately kicked into high gear. "Give me his name," he said, already pulling out his phone. "I'll have my legal team send him a letter he won't be able to ignore. We can have him in court by the end of the week." Lena stopped wiping the counter and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No? What do you mean, no?" he asked, confused. "He's breaking the law. We can solve this." "I don't want you to solve it, Adrian," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can solve it myself, but I can do it faster, more efficiently." "That's not the point," she said, her voice rising slightly. "The point is that it's my problem. It's my life. You can't just swoop in with your lawyers and your money and fix everything. When you do that, you're not helping me. You're erasing me. You're making me feel like I'm incapable of handling my own life." Her words hit him like a physical blow. He had been so focused on providing a solution that he had completely missed the emotional impact. He was treating her life like a hostile takeover, another problem to be efficiently managed. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. I didn't see it that way." "I know," she said, her expression softening, "because in your world, problems are things to be eliminated. In my world, sometimes problems are just part of the story. They're how we learn. They're how we get stronger." She gave him a small, sad smile. "I don't need a billionaire to fix my faucet, Adrian. I just need a friend to listen while I complain about it." He stood there, humbled once again by her wisdom. He had so much to learn. He started to learn. He stopped offering money and started offering time. When her scooter broke down, he didn't buy her a new car. He spent a Saturday afternoon with her in a greasy garage, drinking terrible coffee and learning more about her life from the stories the old mechanic told than he ever could have from a background check. When she was worried about her brother's upcoming exams, he didn't offer to hire a tutor. He sat with her for hours, helping her create flashcards and quizzing her on the material, becoming a genuine partner in her family's success. They were building something real, slowly, carefully. But the ghost of their differences still lingered. The outside world, with its neat boxes and harsh judgments, was always waiting. The intrusion came in the form of a reporter from a high-profile business magazine. He was doing a feature on Adrian, a "Where Is He Now?" piece about the reclusive billionaire who had seemingly dropped off the map. Adrian had refused to be interviewed, but the reporter, a tenacious man named Peterson, had been digging. He showed up at Mama Rosa's pizzeria one evening, where Lena was working her shift. "Miss Petrova?" he said, approaching her table. "I'm Mark Peterson. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Adrian Sterling." Lena froze. "I have no comment." "Come on," Peterson said with a slick smile. "The whole city is curious. The pizza delivery girl who tamed the beast of Wall Street. It's a great story. People want to know. Are you living in the mansion? Is he paying your bills? Is there a wedding on the horizon?" Every question was a thinly veiled insinuation, a reduction of her complex, beautiful, and terrifying relationship to a cheap tabloid headline. "My relationship with Mr. Sterling is private," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "Is it?" Peterson countered, his voice dropping. "Because a source tells me he's been spending a lot of time in your world. Is the great Adrian Sterling slumming it? Or is there something more? Is he in some kind of trouble? Is he hiding from something?" "Get out," Rico, the pizzeria's owner and Lena's fierce protector, said, appearing from the kitchen with a rolling pin in his hand. "Now." Peterson left, but the damage was done. The encounter left Lena shaken. She realized that, in the eyes of the world, she would always be a liability to Adrian. Her past, her lack of wealth and status, it would always be a weapon that people could use against him. She didn't tell Adrian about the reporter. She didn't want to worry him. But a seed of fear had been planted. Was she holding him back? Was their love, which felt so real and so right in the quiet of their shared moments, a weakness for him in the harsh glare of the public eye? She started to pull away again, just slightly. She became a little more reserved, a little more careful. The easy laughter didn't come as quickly. Adrian, who was now exquisitely attuned to her moods, noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked one evening after she had been unusually quiet during dinner. "Nothing," she lied. "Just tired." He didn't push, but he knew she was hiding something. The old familiar paranoia, the fear of secrets and betrayal, began to whisper at the edges of his mind. He tried to fight it. He trusted her. He did. But trust was a new, fragile muscle, and his old habits of suspicion were strong. He did something he wasn't proud of. He had his security team run a check on the reporter, Mark Peterson. He just wanted to know who he was, what his angle was. The report came back the next day, and one line made Adrian's blood run cold. Peterson's primary source for the Sterling story appears to be an anonymous tip from a senior executive at a rival firm, a firm owned by Adrian's ex-wife. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated, that for a moment he couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a reporter digging for a story. It was a targeted attack, orchestrated by the woman who had already broken his heart once. She was trying to do it again, this time by using Lena as a weapon. His first instinct was to go to war, to use his immense power and wealth to crush his ex-wife and the reporter. But then he thought of Lena. He thought of her quiet strength, of her belief in solving problems with honesty, not aggression. He knew what he had to do. He had to tell her the truth, all of it, and they would have to face this storm, like everything else, together. Adrian found Lena in the small, sun-drenched nook off the mansion's library, a space she had claimed as her own and filled with overflowing pots of herbs and stacks of well-loved books. She was sketching in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, the simple, peaceful scene a stark contrast to the storm raging in his own mind. He was about to shatter this peace, and he hated it. "Lena," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up, her expression immediately shifting from creative focus to concern as she saw the look on his face. "Adrian, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," he said, walking into the room and sitting in the armchair opposite her. "I've seen the ghost of my past." He laid it all out for her. The reporter, Mark Peterson, the connection to his ex-wife, Catherine, the calculated, malicious nature of the attack. He didn't soften the details. He didn't hide his own history. He told her about the bitter divorce, about Catherine's obsession with public image, about her deep-seated resentment that he had found happiness after she had left him for a wealthier man, who ironically had since lost his fortune. "She's not just trying to hurt me," he concluded, his voice grim. "She's trying to use you to do it, to paint you as a gold digger, to frame our relationship as some sordid tabloid affair, to invalidate everything we've built." Lena listened in silence, her sketchbook forgotten in her lap. As he spoke, he saw not fear in her eyes, but a slow-burning anger. She wasn't afraid for herself, she was angry for him. "So she's the grumpy troll from your past," she said finally, the use of her familiar playful language in such a serious moment a sign of her incredible resilience. He almost smiled. "She's the fire-breathing dragon at the gate of the castle, yes." "And what do dragons do when they're threatened?" she asked, her mind already working, analyzing the problem like one of their shared puzzles. "They breathe fire. They try to burn everything down. This article, it's just the first puff of smoke." He was stunned by her perception. She wasn't panicking, she was strategizing. "My legal team is already preparing to file for a restraining order, to sue for defamation." "No," she said, cutting him off. "What do you mean, no?" "Adrian, you can't fight this with lawyers," she said, leaning forward, her eyes intense. "That's her world. That's her game. Lawsuits, public statements, denials. It just adds fuel to the fire. It makes the story bigger. It confirms to the world that there's a fight happening." "Then what do we do?" he asked, feeling completely out of his depth. This was a battle he didn't know how to fight. "We do nothing," she said. "Nothing?" The idea was so foreign to his nature, so counter to his every instinct to attack, to control, to win. "Not nothing," she clarified, a thoughtful look on her face. "We do the one thing she doesn't expect. We live. We go on with our lives. We go to the park with Chloe. We eat pizza on a Tuesday night. We are so unapologetically, boringly happy that her story of drama and scandal has nothing to stick to. You can't burn down a house that isn't on fire." He stared at her, once again humbled by her simple, profound wisdom. He had been preparing for a war, sharpening his swords, raising his shields, and she was suggesting they simply refuse to show up for the battle. It was the most brilliant, most terrifying strategy he had ever heard. "And what about the article?" he asked. "It's going to be published. People will read it. They will judge." "Let them," she said with a shrug. "The people who matter, the ones who really know us, they won't believe it. And the ones who do, well, they were never on our side to begin with." She reached across the small space between them and took his hand. "We know the truth, Adrian. That's the only fortress we need." He looked at their joined hands, at the quiet strength in her face. And for the first time since he had received that report, he felt the knot of fear in his stomach begin to loosen. He wasn't alone in this. He had a partner. A partner who fought not with lawyers, but with a weapon he was just beginning to understand: grace. Their strategy of joyful defiance was put to the test the following day. Just as Lena had predicted, Mark Peterson's article was published online, a slick, poisonous piece of journalism filled with innuendo and half-truths. It painted a picture of a calculating, low-class woman who had ensnared a grieving, vulnerable billionaire. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. The fallout was immediate. Adrian's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from concerned board members and nosy acquaintances. Lena's social media, which was usually a quiet place of bookstore photos and pictures of her brother, was flooded with hateful comments. They followed Lena's plan. They didn't issue a statement. They didn't answer the calls from reporters. That afternoon, they took Chloe to the zoo. It was a surreal experience. They knew people were watching them, whispering, taking surreptitious photos with their phones. But they focused only on Chloe. They laughed at the monkeys. They made funny faces at the lions. They shared a giant pretzel. They were a family, having a normal, happy day, and their simple, joyful reality was a silent, powerful rebuttal to the ugly fiction being written about them. But it was hard. When they got home, Adrian saw the exhaustion on Lena's face, the slight tremor in her hands as she made tea. The public scrutiny was taking its toll. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said gently, coming up behind her in the kitchen and placing his hands on her shoulders. She leaned back against him with a sigh. "I know. It's one thing when they attack me. It's another when they use you, when they use Chloe to do it." "We're in this together," he said, his voice a low, steady promise. "She can't break us unless we let her." That night, they were sitting in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, when Adrian's phone rang. It was his ex-wife, Catherine. He looked at the screen, then at Lena. "I have to take this," he said. Lena nodded, her expression supportive. He walked into his study and closed the door. "What do you want, Catherine?" "I saw the article," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. It must be so difficult, being taken advantage of like that." "I'm not being taken advantage of," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I'm in love. You might not remember what that feels like." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "There's no need to be cruel, Adrian. I'm just concerned. This woman, she's not from our world. She's going to ruin you." "No," he said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. "She's the one who's saving me." He was about to hang up when Catherine played her final, most desperate card. "I'm worried about Chloe," she said, her voice now a weaponized version of maternal concern. "What will people say at her school? How will this affect her? A father's scandalous affair with the help. It's not a stable environment, Adrian. Maybe she would be better off with me for a while, until this all blows over." The threat was clear and utterly monstrous. She was threatening to use their own daughter against him. The old Adrian would have panicked, would have given in to any demand to protect Chloe. But the new Adrian, the one who had learned about real strength from Lena, did not flinch. "If you ever," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "ever try to use our daughter as a pawn in your bitter little games again, you will discover that I can still be the ruthless man you remember. Only this time, I'll be fighting for something that actually matters. Stay away from my family, Catherine. This is your only warning." He hung up the phone, his hand shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. He walked back into the living room. Lena looked at him, her eyes full of a quiet understanding. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She could see it on his face. She stood up, walked over to him, and wrapped her arms around him. He buried his face in her hair, the scent of her, the simple, solid reality of her, a calming anchor in the middle of his storm. "She can't win," he whispered, his voice muffled against her. "I know," she said, her voice a steady, comforting presence, "because she's fighting with weapons. And we," she said, pulling back to look him in the eye, "are fighting with love. It's not a fair fight." He looked at her fierce, unwavering belief in them, and he felt a surge of courage. She was right. "What's our next move, Miss Petrova?" he asked, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Her eyes sparkled with a familiar strategic glint. "I think," she said, "it's time for the pizza delivery girl to make a public statement, but not the one anyone is expecting." The next day, Lena did something she had sworn she would never do. She called Mark Peterson, the reporter. "I'll give you an exclusive interview," she said, her voice calm and businesslike. "But on my terms, no cameras, no sound bites, just a conversation. And you have to print every word exactly as I say it." Peterson, smelling the biggest story of his career, agreed immediately. They met in the same quiet diner where she and Adrian had had their mentorship day. She arrived alone. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman in control. For an hour, she told him her story. She didn't badmouth Catherine. She didn't complain about the unfairness of the world. She just told the truth, with a simple, powerful dignity. She told him about her brother, about her struggles, about her love for her work. She told him about Adrian, not as a billionaire, but as a grieving father, a man trying to find his way back to his own heart. She reframed the entire narrative, not as a story of a gold digger and a victim, but as a story of two lonely people who had found in each other an unexpected saving grace. "People see Adrian Sterling as a fortress," she finished, her gaze direct. "But they don't see the man inside, who is just trying to protect his little girl. And people see me as a pizza delivery girl. They don't see the woman who is just trying to build a life for her family." "Maybe," she said, a small, wise smile on her face, "the real story isn't about our differences. It's about how, in the end, we're all just trying to do the same thing. Find a little bit of warmth in a cold world." The article was published the next morning. It wasn't a scandalous exposé. It was a moving, deeply human portrait. It didn't just clear her name, it made her a hero. The public reaction was a tidal wave of support. The hateful comments on her social media were replaced by messages of admiration. The story wasn't about a scandal anymore. It was about love, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. Lena had not just refused to fight in Catherine's war. She had won it without ever firing a shot. The aftermath of Lena's interview was a profound and satisfying silence. Catherine, deprived of the public scandal she had so desperately tried to ignite, retreated into the shadows. The hateful noise of the tabloids was replaced by a wave of public admiration. Lena was no longer the pizza girl. She was a symbol of quiet strength and dignity. The story, as she had so wisely predicted, had been rewritten. For Adrian and Lena, it was a turning point. They had faced the worst the outside world could throw at them, and they had not only survived, they had won on their own terms. The experience forged their bond into something unbreakable. The last of their doubts and hesitations seemed to burn away in the fire of that public battle, leaving behind a love that was clear, strong, and deeply rooted in mutual respect. Life in the fortress of the Sterling mansion began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Lena's presence was no longer a temporary arrangement. It was the new, joyful center of gravity around which their lives revolved. She filled the sterile, quiet spaces with the beautiful, messy chaos of a real family. The scent of her baking now mingled with the old leather of the library. Chloe's colorful, slightly sticky artwork began to appear on the pristine refrigerator door. And the sound of laughter became the new, unofficial soundtrack of the house. Adrian, for his part, continued his transformation. He had learned that control was an illusion, and that true strength lay in vulnerability and trust. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour, not out of a sense of duty, but because he genuinely wanted to be home. He discovered the simple, profound joy of reading bedtime stories to his daughter, of having dinner at the kitchen table instead of alone in his study, and of simply sitting in the same room with Lena, sharing a comfortable silence. He also found a new purpose for his immense wealth. Inspired by Lena's dedication to her brother's education, they secretly established a foundation. The Sterling Petrova Initiative was an anonymous fund that provided scholarships and support for students from low-income families who were also acting as caregivers for sick relatives. The Lenas of the world, who were forced to choose between their dreams and their duties. It was a quiet, deeply personal project, a way for them to turn their own stories of pain and struggle into a source of hope for others. Their love story unfolded in the small, ordinary moments, in the way he would instinctively reach for her hand when they were walking, in the way she would leave a silly, hand-drawn comic on his desk after he'd had a particularly stressful day. They were no longer the billionaire and the pizza girl. They were just Adrian and Lena. Two people building a life together, one messy, beautiful day at a time. One sunny Saturday afternoon, about a month after the article was published, they were in the mansion's sprawling backyard. It was a space Adrian had rarely used, a perfectly manicured lawn that had always felt more like a golf course than a yard. But Lena had transformed it. There was now a slightly crooked vegetable garden in one corner, a brightly colored swing set under the old oak tree, and a collection of mismatched pots filled with cheerful, unruly flowers. They were having a picnic, a chaotic, wonderful affair. Chloe was running through the sprinklers, her laughter echoing in the warm air. Lena was trying to teach Adrian the art of making the perfect sandwich, a process which, according to her, involved a very specific and highly debatable ratio of mayonnaise to mustard. "You're using too much mustard," she said, shaking her head with mock seriousness. "It's overpowering the delicate flavor profile of the turkey. It's a rookie mistake, Sterling." "I am a master of logistics," he retorted, carefully placing a pickle on his creation. "I believe I am qualified to construct a sandwich." "You're a master of spreadsheets," she teased, stealing one of his potato chips. "Sandwich construction is an art form. It requires soul." He looked at her, at the smear of mustard on her nose, at the way the sun lit up her hair, at the pure, unadulterated joy in her eyes. And in that moment, he felt a wave of love so powerful, it was almost overwhelming. He knew with an absolute certainty that defied all data and logic what he had to do next. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice suddenly serious. Is it another secret, scary part of the mansion? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Because I'm not sure I'm ready for the dungeon. It's not in the mansion, he said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. Come with me. He led her to the garage, a space that housed his collection of rare, expensive sports cars. She had always found it a bit ridiculous. Unless you're proposing to a Ferrari, I'm not sure what we're doing here, she quipped. He didn't reply. He just opened the passenger door of his most prized possession, a vintage silver Aston Martin. Get in, he said. They drove in a comfortable silence, the city giving way to the lush, green countryside outside of New York City. She didn't ask where they were going. She just trusted him. He finally pulled off the main highway and onto a small, unmarked dirt road that wound its way through a thick forest of pine trees. The road ended in a clearing, and in the middle of the clearing was a small, charming, slightly ramshackle house. It had a wraparound porch, a stone chimney, and a view that looked out over a sparkling, serene lake. What is this place? Lena asked, her voice full of awe. This was my grandfather's, Adrian said quietly. The one who loved jazz. He built it himself, by hand. After my grandmother died, he would come up here. He said it was the only place he could still hear her laugh. He paused. My father wanted to sell it years ago, said it was an unproductive asset. I bought it from the estate without telling him. It's the one thing I ever did that was purely for myself. He had never shown this place to anyone, not his ex-wife, not his closest friends. It was his sanctuary, a repository of the one happy, uncomplicated love story he had ever known. And he was sharing it with her. He took her hand and led her inside. The house smelled of old wood, pine needles, and memories. There was a large stone fireplace, comfortable, worn-out armchairs, and shelves filled with books, not on finance, but on fishing and philosophy. He taught me how to be quiet here, Adrian said, his voice a low rumble in the silent house. He taught me that you don't need a lot of noise to have a full life. He led her out to the back porch, which overlooked the lake. The water was as still as glass, reflecting the deep blue of the sky and the tall, green pines that lined its shores. Lena, he said, turning to her. When I met you, my life was like that mansion, big, empty, and perfectly ordered. You were like a chaotic, wonderful pizza-delivering whirlwind that came in and rearranged all the furniture. She laughed, a soft, happy sound. You filled my quiet house with laughter, he continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. You filled my quiet life with joy. You taught me that a home isn't about perfect order. It's about the beautiful, messy, wonderful people you share it with. He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a velvet box. He pulled out a simple, slightly crumpled cardboard pizza box, the kind from Mama Rosa's. She looked at him, a confused, beautiful smile on her face. I know this isn't a diamond, he said, opening the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of checkered paper, was not a pizza. It was a simple, beautiful ring. It wasn't a large, flashy stone. It was a single, perfect, and incredibly rare blue diamond, the exact color of her eyes, set in a simple, elegant platinum band. And I know this isn't a traditional proposal, but we're not a traditional couple. He got down on one knee, right there on the dusty wooden porch of his grandfather's old house. Lena Petrova, he said, his voice shaking with the force of his love. You are the most logical, most wonderful, most important decision of my life. You are my home. Will you do me the incredible honor of being my wife, my partner, and my best friend? Will you marry me and fill the rest of my days with your beautiful, chaotic, wonderful love? Tears were streaming down her face, but her smile was the brightest thing he had ever seen. You're proposing with a pizza box? She asked, her voice choked with happy tears. I thought it was fitting, he said, a wide, hopeful grin on his face. It's how our real story started. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Adrian Sterling. 1,000,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it was a perfect fit. He stood up and pulled her into a kiss that was a promise of a future filled with laughter, with healing, with adventure, and with a love that was as deep and as serene as the quiet lake before them. They were home. The wedding of Adrian Sterling and Lena Petrova was not the event of the season on the society pages. It was something far better, the event of a lifetime for a small, eclectic group of people who had witnessed their improbable love story unfold. They chose not to get married in a grand ballroom or an ancient cathedral. They chose to get married on the back porch of the lakeside cabin, the place where Adrian had finally allowed himself to be vulnerable and where Lena had finally allowed herself to believe. The guest list was small, intimate, and perfectly represented their blended world. Lena's mother and her younger brother, whose college tuition was now securely funded by a very discreet scholarship from the Sterling Petrova Initiative, were there, their faces shining with a joy that was almost overwhelming. Rico, the gruff but soft-hearted owner of Mama Rosa's Pizzeria, was the official caterer, having closed his restaurant for the day to personally oversee a magnificent spread of authentic Italian food. Chloe, now a cheerful, chatty 8-year-old, was the flower girl, her basket filled not with rose petals, but with brightly colored, hand-folded paper airplanes, an idea she and Lena had come up with together. On Adrian's side, there were a handful of loyal executives who had supported his transformation, and his sister, who had flown in from London, her initial skepticism having long since melted into a deep sisterly affection for Lena. "She saved you from becoming a very rich, that very lonely old man," she had told him, her voice full of emotion. "You'd better not mess this up." The ceremony was simple and deeply personal. They stood under an archway. Lena had decorated herself with wildflowers and pine branches from the surrounding forest. The officiant was not a priest or a judge, but Adrian's grandfather's old friend, a retired jazz musician with a warm smile and a lifetime of stories in his eyes. Lena didn't wear a traditional white gown. She wore a simple, cream-colored dress made of soft, flowing fabric that she had designed herself, its elegant lines a testament to a talent she was slowly rediscovering. Adrian wore a classic, well-tailored suit, but he had forgone a tie, a small but significant symbol of his newfound freedom from the rigid constraints of his old life. Their vows were not polished speeches. They were conversations, promises whispered to each other in the quiet, sun-dappled afternoon. "Adrian," Lena began, her voice soft but steady as she took his hands. "You came into my life like a storm, a man of quiet, orderly chaos who thought the world could be controlled. You taught me that it's okay to let people in, to be vulnerable, to ask for help. But more than that," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "You saw me. Not the pizza girl, not the nanny, but me. And you made me believe that I was worthy of being seen. I promised to spend the rest of my life filling your silent fortress with laughter, with terrible off-key singing, and with a love that is as messy and as real as we are." When it was Adrian's turn, his voice was thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Lena," he said, his gaze locked on hers, "you are the most beautifully illogical, wonderfully unpredictable, and profoundly kind variable that has ever entered my life. You crashed my system, you corrupted my data, and you rebooted my entire soul. You taught me that a home is not a place of perfect order, but a place of unconditional love. You taught me how to be a father. You taught me how to be a man. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your student for all of our days. I promise to always listen to your stories, and I promise to always, always choose us." When they were pronounced husband and wife, Chloe tossed her paper airplanes into the air, and they soared and dipped in the gentle breeze, a perfect, joyful symbol of their new journey. Their first kiss as a married couple was long and deep, and tasted of salt from the lake and the promise of a lifetime. The reception was a celebration of everything they loved. Rico's pizza and pasta were served on long, rustic wooden tables. The jazz musician played old, soulful tunes on his saxophone. And as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, they danced their first dance on the old wooden porch, their friends and family surrounding them, their laughter echoing in the quiet of the forest. It was not the wedding of a billionaire, it was the wedding of a family. Married life was a quiet, happy revelation. They chose to make the lakeside cabin their primary home, a sanctuary away from the noise and pressure of the city. Adrian, to the astonishment of his board of directors, restructured his role at the company. He was still the chairman, the visionary, but he delegated the day-to-day operations to a trusted team. He worked from home most days, finding that his best ideas came not in a sterile boardroom, but on a quiet morning walk by the lake with his wife. Lena, with the full backing of the Sterling Petrova Initiative, didn't just support her brother's education. She created a network of scholarships for other young people in similar situations, turning her own past struggle into a source of empowerment for a new generation. She also, with Adrian's encouragement, started designing again, not for the cutthroat world of high fashion, but for herself, creating beautiful, simple pieces of clothing that she sold in a small online boutique. Their life was a beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of their two worlds. They hosted elegant, high-powered investors for quiet weekends at the cabin, where deals were often closed not over a conference table, but during a fishing trip on the lake. And they would drive into the city to have loud, chaotic, wonderful dinners at Mama Rosa's pizzeria, where Rico would always save them the best table. Chloe thrived. She blossomed in the warmth and stability of her new family. She learned to ride a bike, to build a campfire, and to identify different constellations in the vast star-filled country sky. She had two parents now, a father who was learning to be present and a mother who had chosen her, a combination that healed the quiet wounds of her early childhood. The final piece of their past was laid to rest one spring afternoon. A letter arrived, postmarked from a small, cat-exclusive clinic in Switzerland. It was from Catherine, Adrian's ex-wife. She was ill, she wrote, the same illness that had taken Adrian's own mother. The letter was not an apology, not really. It was a stark, unvarnished admission of a life lived with regret. I spent my life chasing wealth, believing it was a shield, she wrote. But in the end, it's a cold and empty fortress. I see the pictures of you, of your new family. You look happy, Adrian, truly happy. That is a kind of wealth I never learned how to acquire. Be good to her, and be the father to Chloe that you are finally learning how to be. Adrian read the letter to Lena on the porch as the sun went down. He felt not anger, not a sense of victory, but a profound, quiet sadness for a woman who had lost her way. "Do you want to see her?" Lena asked gently. He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Her story is finished. Ours is the one I want to focus on." He took her hand. "Our story is just getting started." And it was. They were no longer defined by their pasts. He, the lonely king in his fortress, she, the resilient survivor fighting to get by. They had found in each other not just a partner, but a new identity. They were a family, a team, a quiet force for good in a world that often forgot the value of simple kindness. One evening, a few years later, they were tucking Chloe into bed. She was 9 now, her face full of the easy confidence of a child who knows she is deeply, unconditionally loved. "Tell me the story," she said, her voice sleepy. It was her favorite ritual. "Which one?" Adrian asked, smiling. "The one about the grumpy CEO and the claustrophobic pizza girl." "No," Chloe said. "The other one. The real one." Lena sat on the edge of the bed and began, her voice soft and familiar. "Once upon a time there was a man who lived in a very tall tower and was afraid of the quiet, and there was a woman who lived in a very small apartment and was afraid of small spaces. And they were both very lonely," Chloe added, already knowing the story by heart. "Yes, they were," Adrian continued, picking up the thread. "But one night they got stuck in a magic box together, and in the dark, they discovered that they weren't so different after all. They discovered that they were both just a little bit broken, and a little bit brave. And they fell in love." Chloe whispered, her eyelids growing heavy. "And they fell in love," Lena confirmed, kissing her forehead. "And they learned that a home isn't a place, it's a feeling. It's the feeling of being safe and seen and loved." They watched their daughter drift off to sleep, a peaceful smile on her face. They walked out of the room hand in hand and stood on the porch of their lakeside home, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a familiar, comforting blanket. "He was right, you know," Adrian said, pulling Lena close. "My grandfather's friend, the musician." "About what?" "He said we had finally found what I was looking for, look." He looked down at her, his eyes full of a love that was now as steady and as deep as the lake before them. "He was right. I just didn't know it yet." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It just took you a while to solve the puzzle." "No," he said, kissing the top of her head. "It took you to show me that some things aren't puzzles to be solved. They're just stories to be lived." And as they stood there, under a sky full of stars, they knew their story was far from over. It was a quiet, beautiful, and infinitely expanding epic. written every day in the simple, ordinary, and miraculous language of a family. 5 years after their wedding on the quiet lakeside porch, the world of Adrian and Lena Sterling had expanded in the most beautiful, unexpected ways. Their home was no longer a silent sanctuary for two, but a bustling, joyful hub filled with the laughter of children. Chloe, now a bright and confident 12-year-old, had a younger brother, a rambunctious 2-year-old named Leo, who had his father's intense blue eyes and his mother's mischievous, chaos-inducing grin. The fortress of silence that had once been Adrian's life was now a distant memory, replaced by a life of happy, noisy, and utterly wonderful unpredictability. He had become the father he had always wanted to be, and the man he never knew he could be. One crisp autumn morning, Adrian found himself standing in the middle of a crowded, sunlit room. It wasn't a corporate boardroom. It was the newly opened Mama Rosa's wing of the city's main public library, a vibrant, colorful space dedicated to children's literature and early learning programs. The wing had been their foundation's flagship project, a tribute to the power of stories and community spaces. He was there for the opening ceremony, not as the main speaker, but as a proud husband. He watched as Lena stood at a small podium, a sleeping Leo nestled in a carrier on her chest, addressing the crowd of families, children, and city officials. "A book is not just a collection of pages," she said, her voice full of the same quiet passion he had fallen in love with. "It's a doorway. It's a refuge. It's a promise that, no matter how lonely or confusing the world may seem, there is always a story waiting to make you feel understood." She spoke of the power of stories to build bridges, to foster empathy, and to give children the tools they needed to imagine a better world for themselves. As she spoke, Adrian looked around the room. He saw his daughter, Chloe, sitting in the front row, reading a book to a group of smaller children, her face a perfect reflection of her mother's compassionate spirit. He saw Rico from the pizzeria, now a board member of their foundation, beaming with pride. He saw the faces of the children, their eyes wide with wonder. This, he realized, was his true legacy. Not the skyscrapers he had built or the deals he had closed, but this room, this community, this family. After the ceremony, as Lena was being swarmed by well-wishers, Adrian took the two kids over to a quiet corner of the new wing. "Look, Daddy," Chloe said, pointing to a beautiful hand-painted mural on the wall. It depicted a whimsical city skyline, but instead of buildings, there were towering stacks of books, and flying between the book towers were little paper airplanes, and a tiny figure of a girl on a scooter, delivering what looked like pizzas. "Do you know who painted that?" Adrian asked, his voice a little thick. "Mommy did," Chloe said proudly. "She said it's our story." Later that evening, they were back at the lakeside cabin, their sanctuary. The kids were asleep, and the house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a peaceful, contented silence, filled with the warmth of a shared life. They sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the still, dark water. "You were incredible today," Adrian said, his arm wrapped tightly around her. "I was just telling a story," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You're always telling stories," he said. "You tell them with everything you do. You've turned my whole life into a love story, Lena." She smiled, a soft, happy expression in the moonlight. "And you, Adrian Sterling, are the most surprising and wonderful hero a girl could ever write." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Do you remember, in the elevator all those years ago? I told you I was afraid of the quiet, afraid of being alone." "I remember," she said. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said, his voice full of a profound, peaceful certainty. "Because you taught me that home isn't about the absence of noise. It's about being filled with the right kind of sounds." He kissed her forehead. "The sound of our children laughing, the sound of you humming in the kitchen, the sound of our hearts beating together." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "That's a very poetic sentiment for a man who used to think in spreadsheets." "I had a very good teacher," he said, a slow, happy smile spreading across his face. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that was a testament to their incredible journey. It was a kiss that held the memory of a chaotic pizza delivery, the terror of a stuck elevator, their shared vulnerability, and the joyful promise on a dusty wooden porch. Their love story had not been a fairy tale. It had been born in the dark, in a moment of shared fear and vulnerability. But it had grown into something far more real and far more resilient. It was a story of two broken people who had, against all odds, found in each other the missing pieces of their own souls. They had learned that true love wasn't about finding a perfect person, but about having the courage to build a perfect life together, one messy, beautiful, chaotic day at a time. As they sat there, under a sky full of stars, the quiet of the night was broken by a soft cry from the baby monitor. "I'll get him," Adrian said, standing up without a moment's hesitation. "No," Lena said, taking his hand. "Let's go together." And they did. They walked back into the warm, brightly lit house, hand in hand, ready to face the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of their shared life together. They were no longer the lonely CEO and the struggling delivery girl. They were a family, and that was the only story that truly mattered. What did you think of the story of Adrian and Lena? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their incredible journey to find each other? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us to the very end, who believes that love can be found in the most unexpected of places, please comment with a simple chaos and love to let us know you were here. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will warm your heart.